Good afternoon and welcome to the AUC Data Science Seminar Series, DS Cubed. While guests are arriving in our virtual space, please take the time to get comfortable, relax, and prepare for a very exciting discussion today. And please remember, for all things AUC Data Science, simply visit our website, datascience.aucenter.edu. Here, you will find an array of information and resources, including our current and previous events. And a very important note, all seminars can be found on our YouTube page to view, share, and even view again, as much as you desire. So please subscribe and engage. Once again, welcome to the AUC Data Science Seminar Series, DS Cubed.
Welcome to the Atlanta University Center Data Science Initiative Seminar Series. We have an amazing lineup of speakers today as we talk about data and the Black vote. But before I get started, we have some words of welcome from Provost Gail Wesson, who's the Provost at Clark Atlanta University. Provost Wesson?
Greetings. I am excited to welcome folks to this exciting data science initiative. I'm calling it a workshop, but it's pretty much a talking back and forth about data science. And this particular piece of being data science and the Black vote, particularly interested in it because I'm always excited about seeing a alumnus. Robert Patillo is an alumnus of CAU, and I did some of my research found out that we also have another commonality. Is I graduated my BS from Illinois Institute of Technology, and Robert actually has his law degree from the Kent School of Law, which is associated with the Illinois Institute of Technology. Also excited about, we've got projects currently going in political science that actually we're trying to develop a community-centered data-informed policy center for racial equality, and we're trying to put that in place. So this talk is right in line with it. So thank you very much for allowing me to be here, and I am looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost Wesson. So today we are definitely in for a treat for a really interesting discussion on data in the Black vote. And so we have three panelists who are going to walk us through and unpack some of these mysteries that may not be clear to us. So we are joined today by Robert Patillo, who's a graduate of Clark Atlanta University, class 06, poli-sci, in Chicago College of Law. He's also an attorney and a lifelong civil and human rights activist. He's entirely dedicated to serving the poor and unprivileged. As an activist, Patillo has led workers on organization campaigns to petition for better wages, worked to integrate segregated organizations, and assisted discriminated workers against celebrity chef Paula Deen, while working with the Reverend Jesse Jackson and the Rainbow Push Coalition. And if anybody didn't know, one of our former faculty members at Morehouse College, Dr. Rudy Horn, who was the math consultant for the Hidden Figures, actually received an award from the Rainbow Push Coalition. So going back to Robert, he's an experienced political strategist and worked for over 15 years on political campaigns on the local, state, and national level. He is currently a talk radio host on CBS Radio Intercom Radio, and a highly sought after political commentator and national speaker. Patillo has been featured in articles in the New York Times, Huffington Post, and Political Magazine, to name a few, and frequents guests on different networks, Fox, CNN, News One. And I actually came across Robert when I was watching the Roland Martin Unplugged show, and he did a call out, hey, if you want to connect with me and what we're doing, let's partner together. And so we called out and he answered. So Robert, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you. Our second panelist will be Dr. Karen Saxe, who's an Associate Executive Director at the American Mathematical Society and also heads the DC-based Office of Governmental Relations. Previously, she was DeWitt Wallace Professor of Mathematics at Macalester College in St. Paul, where she taught for almost 30 years. And she was also a colleague to Provost Kendrick Brown at Morehouse College. She's the current provost at Morehouse. I mean, we are all interconnected here. So her course offerings while she was an instructor included team talk courses with the poli-sci, political scientists on mathematics and social justice. She was the 2013-14 AMS Congressional Fellow working in the US Senate on education issues with a focus on higher education and STEM education. In Minnesota, she served on the Citizens Redistricting Commission following the 2010 census and serves on the Common Cause Minnesota Redistricting Leadership Circle. She has a husband and 3 children, and when not at work, she especially enjoys being with them, reading, hiking, and sharing good food, wine, and beverages with family and friends. Karen, it's great to have you here. And our third panelist is Ron Wasserstein. Dr. Ron Wasserstein, he's the executive director of the American Statistical Association and assumed this role back in 2007. He provides executive leadership and management for the association and is responsible for ensuring that the ASA fulfills its mission to promote the practice and profession of statistics. He is responsible for a staff of 36, and they are headquartered in the DMV in Alexandria, Virginia, right around the corner. When we were at NSF, we would hop over to ASA and hang out for fun statistical conversations. So as executive director, he's also an official ASA spokesperson. So prior to ASA, he was a mathematics and statistics department faculty member and administrator at Washburn University in Topeka, Kansas. And during his last 7 years at the school, he also served as the university's vice president for academic affairs. He's a long-term member of the ASA, joined back in '83. I won't say how old I was there, and has been active as a volunteer in ASA for more than 20 years and has twice served as president of the Kansas Western Missouri chapter of the ASA. I don't think there's much in the ASA that Ron has not done yet. He's also, obviously, he's a fellow of the ASA and also of the AAAS. He presented and has awards, numerous awards, including the George Mack Distinguished Service Award from Kappa Mu Epsilon National Mathematics Honor Society. Ron and his wife Sherry live in Northern Virginia, also known as Nova, and enjoys jogging. Maybe I'll see you on the Rock Creek Trail sometime, Ron. Movies, been watching TV series, live theater books, and doting on their children and grandchildren. So thank you, Ron, for being here. We really look forward to this discussion on data and the Black vote, how are campaigns using data, what is this thing called racial gerrymandering, and what the heck happened with deterrence. So, I'm just going to pass the ball on to Robert Patillo. Patillo, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Dr. Washington. Thank you all for having me. It's so wonderful to do anything with the AEC. As was mentioned, I am a Clark Atlanta University graduate, 02206. I was a member of the marching band there, trombone section, boneyard, and really it's a pleasure to be back. And the reason that this discussion is so important is because data is the only resource that matters in the 21st century. I used to say it's the most important resource, but at this point it's the only resource. If you if you need any proof of that, just look at the top 10 most wealthy people on earth and what their industry is. What do they mine for? Jeff Bezos is not out here digging for gold. He digs for data. Elon Musk got his start not with rocketry. They call him the real life Iron Man, but in reality, it was about data and PayPal and making money through e-commerce and then smart investments. You can go down the line through Richard Branson, through Mark Zuckerberg. The only resource that matters in the world in the 21st century is data. The reason for this is obvious, that any of you who are listening to this seminar and then also playing on social media in another window, you'll know that if you look on the side of your Snapchat or your TikTok or your Instagram, you see targeted ads. If you think about a sweater, you'll get an email that has that exact sweater that you just thought about in your email, because that's the way that the commerce works in the 21st century. Now, this process has already been in progress for the last 20 to 25 years, since the internet explosion, the dot-com boom of the late 90s into the early 2000s. But coronavirus and COVID and the lockdowns have accelerated this. Normally, we would be meeting in Haven Warren or McFeeder's Dennis or Club Woody, the Woodruff Library, to have this discussion. But we're doing it over Zoom because we're now in a fully digital world. Fast food restaurants are rolling out new concepts without dining rooms and just contactless orders that are ordered over application. The reason they want you to order on the app is they want to be able to get that data from you. By you ordering over the app, they know what you order, exactly how you like your taco to come, how often you like to have it. So they can see on the app that every Tuesday at 1 o'clock on the dot, you order a double quarter pounder with cheese, no onions, extra ketchup, then you'll be sure in a couple weeks you'll get a push notification of advertising to you at 1 o'clock on Tuesday, a double quarter pounder with cheese with no onions, extra ketchup, and which will be popping up directly on your phone and on your social media because all those accounts are interconnected. So when we say the data is the most valuable resource and indeed the only resource that matters, you just have to dig down that anything you think about as an industry is actually data. And as corporations realize this, they invested in that. And concurrently, as campaigns realize this, they invested in it. Now, when I was at Clark Atlanta, I got my start in politics really working on that 03-04 presidential race. I was a campus organizer for John Edwards when he was running. We had a big event right there in the Woodruff Library in the AUC. And at that time, campaigns had just started doing things like meetup.com, sending push notifications through Black Planet and Mihente, or working through MySpace to organize events and those sorts of things. And that apparatus grew. And in many ways, one of the postmortems after the 2008 campaign or presidential election was the way that President Obama was able to leverage data into targeted get out the vote efforts, which were really able to pull him across the finish line in many of the swing states. Pushing forward even more, going to 2016, what we saw is President Trump with a brilliant data apparatus. Instead of spending $3 billion on his campaign, he figured out how to get $3 billion in free media and was able to leverage things like Twitter and other social media posts and chat rooms and so on and so forth to get his people out, particularly in swing states and swing districts, because he knew that's what it would take to win, because he knew he was not going to win the popular vote. Concurrent to that point, if you look at Republicans over the last 30 something years, let's say 32 years, they've won the popular vote a grand total of one time. And that was in that 2004 campaign. Before that, you can go all the way back to George H.W. Bush in 1988 as the only time that Republicans won the popular vote. Other than that, they've learned how to govern from a minority position through the use of data and targeting. So so it's less about having the most people on your side. It's about making sure that the right people in the right place turn out at the right time. So let's shrink this down to the state level and what's currently going on at the Capitol here in Atlanta or here in Georgia. You have various voter suppression bills working their way through the Georgia State Legislature right now because of what happened on January the 5th, where young people and African Americans, minorities turned out in record numbers to give Democrats the first two statewide elected officials in over a decade. So how do we get to the place where Democrats were a party that did not have power in the state house, the state senate, the governor's mansion, or any of these statewide elected positions? Well, if you go all the way back to 2006, Thurber Baker was the last African American or Democrat who was elected statewide, and he got nearly 60% of the vote in that election in 2006. So that's nearly 15 years ago that this election took place. Then in 2010, Republicans were able to take over the state legislature, and they were in charge of redistricting. Now, redistricting is the process of redrawing those state lines. So it redraws congressional districts, it redraws state house districts, it redraws many of the municipal lines, and the party that is in charge is able to gerrymander. Gerrymandering is the process of drawing lines around a particular district to get the right people that you want into that district, and then limit the power of the other group. So an example that I'll give is, let's say you have Clayton County, which is south of Atlanta, which is a majority African-American county. So if you will have let's say 80% African-American population, you could either cut that 80% up into 4 separate districts where you'll have 4 separate African-Americans in office, or because Republicans are in charge, you draw all of them into one district, and then you have 3 white districts around 1 black district. So despite having the exact same number of people and the exact same population density, you've effectively taken 4 African American elected positions and pushed it down to 1 just by drawing the lines a different way. And the way that they draw these lines is based on data, based on census data. You know, the census that just took place in 2020. They use that data and information in order to draw these lines by taking that, as well as phone numbers, social media accounts, vote builder information, demographic data. They're able to determine where they are going to draw these lines. They're also able to insert them into computers and create predictive models to find out, well, in 10 years, what will these demographics look like? And you can model those things out mathematically. So despite the fact we still think of politics being about big speeches and big crowds and turnout and kissing babies and those sorts of things, at its core is a stone cold data operation, no different than Amazon, no different than any other social media company. And the way that you know this is true is, one of the things that Trump bragged about a lot were his crowd sizes. And if you were simply to go by crowd sizes, you would have thought it would be Donald Trump versus Bernie Sanders in both 2016 and 2020. Joe Biden had like 5 people at most of his events, but it's about data, not about crowd sizes anymore. And despite having massive crowds everywhere he went, Donald Trump lost the popular vote in 2016 by 3 million votes, lost the popular vote in 2020 by 7 million votes. So this is why the data is so important, because that dictates where you can expend resources, how you draw lines, where exactly the votes are coming from, and it can indeed swing elections. So let's take Georgia again as an example. Georgia is a state, after the 2010 census, the demographic numbers were nearly 35% African American, 15% Hispanic, 6% Asian American, 52% women. And as all of you know, Atlanta being one of the largest LGBTQ IAPK plus communities in the country. So despite those demographic numbers, because that sounds very much like a purple or a blue state, we still were not able to elect the Democrats statewide for over a decade. The reason for this is data and the ability to redraw lines, to gerrymander. And by doing so, you take the 35% of African Americans in this state and you give them a grand total of 0 statewide elected officials to represent them. You take the 15% of Hispanics in the state and you give them 0 statewide elected officials. So this is why Georgia remained for so long a deep red state, not because of the demographics, not because the people want it, but the people in power were able to use the data to manipulate the vote. It's not about who. It's almost like a football game where your team is bigger, faster, stronger, more talented, better practiced, but the other side is paying off the refs. So I don't care how good you are on your side, the other side has the ref in their pocket, and this is how you control elections. And then when you expand this out throughout the Southeast, you see similar demographic numbers in South Carolina, in Georgia, in Alabama, even in Mississippi and New Orleans. These are all places which should be blue states, which should be African-American strongholds based on demographics and population, but are not because of voter suppression and the data operations that they are running. So there's an old country saying, I'm from down in Waverly Hall, Georgia. None of you know where that's at. That's a little bit south of, or a little bit north of Columbus, in the middle of nowhere. But there's a saying out there where they say, never cut the tail off a rattlesnake. What does that mean? The rattle makes all the noise. The rattle gets your attention. The head is what bites you. So you don't want to cut the tail off and leave the head, because the head can still bite you. So when we're talking, we see these things, the people storming the Capitol, the flags, the rallies, that's the rattle. Those are the things that don't have the power to actually hurt you. The head is the boring stuff. The head is what's going on in the Capitol right now, committee hearings, votes on redistricting, what number of days of early voting will be available, how can we cut down on the number of absentee ballots coming in, what can we do to make it more difficult for people to vote. One thing the Reverend Jackson tells me consistently that Dr. King told him during the movement was that it's always about skimming. It's never been about the wholesale putting bars over the polling place or sicking dogs on everybody and hoses, those sorts of things. It's about skimming. If you can stop 1 out of every 100 people from voting against you on a statewide level, well, that's 1% of the vote. Stacey Abrams lost by 1.8% of the vote. So you only have to get about 1 or 2 people out of every 100 to not be able to vote to change the entire complexion of a state electoral system. And this is how you end up with a constitutional majority for Republicans in the state house and the Senate and statewide elected officials. So this is the importance of data science and why going forward, we have to concentrate on getting those numbers in our favor and understanding how to transition that data into power.
Robert, I completely agree. I completely agree. And Stacy is my Spelman sister. So we have a lot of, even though my background might be red and my shirt, there's a lot of blue love, Spelman love going on over here. So that's so great. Thank you so much for those insights. Dr. Karen Saxe.
Thanks, Talitha. And thanks for inviting me to this AUC panel with Ron and Robert. It's a real honor. And Robert started by talking about he mentioned several different ways that voters can be disenfranchised, everything from the timings of that voting, that polls are open, to gerrymandering. And I'm going to dig in a lot more on the redistricting and gerrymandering. One place that data about voters are used extensively is in redistricting and gerrymandering, I want to say. Every 10 years, our congressional district lines are redrawn, as Robert mentioned, and these are both US and at state levels. Census data are used to do this. In addition to political districts, other geographic units, such as school districts, are also redrawn, and all these lines work to help or hinder us on our way to racial equity. Redistricting is the third step in a 3-step process that happens every decade and has since 1790. Sorry about that. The first step is the census. The second is reapportionment, and the third is redistricting. The census, in fact, is mandated in the Constitution of the United States precisely for the purpose of reapportionment and then subsequent redistricting. The middle step, reapportionment, looks at census data and decides how many US House seats each state gets, which, among other things, determine the state's weight in presidential elections. And this kind of ties into what Robert was saying about the popular vote versus which president actually gets elected. Mathematics and statistics are involved in all 3 steps, and there's a lot of material here, way more that can happen in 10 minutes. So I'm going to now start with, going through the steps. So the 2020 census is finally over. It took longer this time than it often takes, and I think Ron is going to go into more details about this. But we now know, and these are announcements that have just come out over the past few weeks, that the numbers for reapportionment should be announced by April 30th, and then the redistricting data should be released by September 30th. Georgia is predicted to keep its current 14 US House seats. And on October 1st, all states, including Georgia, have to start their hard work to redraw the lines. And even if you keep the same number of House seats, you still have to redistrict. People have moved around. There's the state legislative districts and so on. And it's really important to get counted in the census. So this is a little commercial break here, I would say, on a slightly different topic. Not only are census data used for redistricting, but as a result of the 2020 census, more than $675 billion every year over the next decade will be distributed to local, state, and tribal governments. The money goes to schools, hospitals, roads, public works, and other vital programs. And an undercount results in your city or your county or your state or your tribe your locality receiving less money than its fair share. And this, of course, plays into the cycle of intergenerational poverty. So let me now jump back to the sort of more technical aspects, but really, it's really important to get counted. In Georgia, Georgia is one of, I think, 27 states, but it's certainly the majority of states where state politicians draw the lines. Both US congressional and state legislative districts are drawn by the state legislature. A simple majority in each of the Georgia House and Senate is required to approve the redistricting plans. And then these are sent to the governor. The governor can veto or accept them. These district plans are for Georgia's 14 US representative seats and also the 236 state legislators. You probably know that Republicans control both houses of the Georgia legislature right now, and the governor's also Republican. It's interesting to think about how that happens, and then you have two Democratic senators. Funny thing that. Anyways, the state House and Senate will draw the lines for themselves, as well as for the 14 US congressional seats. Georgia is one of the 23 states right now in which we currently have a Republican trifecta. And we really are self-sorting ourselves geographically. In 1992, 38% of Americans lived in what were considered landslide districts. In 2020, it was almost 60%. Consistent with this, and as compared to 2011, there are more Republican trifecta states. So now there are 23, there were 22 in 2011, but there's also more Democratic trifectas. There are now 15 and there were 11 last time. I want to point out that gerrymandering really is a bipartisan game. In fact, more than 80% of Americans live in trifecta states. This observation certainly implies that we're going to see more partisan gerrymandering than the last time when we drew the lines in 2011. So as Robert said, gerrymandering is the act of manipulating boundaries to gain advantage for some group. Partisan gerrymandering is one type. Racial gerrymandering is another. And by the way, the term gerrymandering refers to Governor Elbridge Gerry. I have no idea why it's not called gerrymandering. In any case, in the early 1800s, he manipulated districts in the Boston area, but the sort of manipulation dates even earlier than that. He just got famous for it. And the history of gerrymandering is rich, and like I said, it's a bipartisan game. Racial gerrymandering is when district lines are intentionally drawn to disperse minority groups across districts in order to dilute their influence in any one district, and thus make it impossible for them to elect representatives they favor. There are two tools commonly used when gerrymandering to favor a racial or political group, and these are called packing and cracking. And this is one thing Robert was talking to, but I don't think, Robert, you use those terms. But in any case, if you're in charge of redistricting, so if you're drawing the lines, you can pack the people you're trying to disenfranchise into one or two districts, give them that district, give them those two districts, but you get the rest of them. You get all the rest of them. Or you could crack that group up by spreading them across several districts, leaving them in the minority in every single district. There are many criteria to simultaneously satisfy when you're redistricting, and other tools that can and are used to gerrymander. There's something called hijacking. All these things rhyme with hacking. The federal government addressed gerrymandering, or racial gerrymandering, in the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which made it illegal to draw districts that intentionally dilute the voting power of a protected minority. Section 5 of that law required certain states to get pre-clearance. A redistricting plan had to be pre-cleared or okayed before it could take effect. In 2013, this section of the Voting Rights Act was gutted by a Supreme Court decision. Georgia was indeed one of the states that was previously covered by that Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act and now is bailed out. So tighten your seatbelts and get ready for big redistricting battles that use data in sophisticated ways, and that'll start after October 1st. And I will pass it off to, well, maybe Talitha to go back to Ron, or thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, Ron.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to share a screen. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're joining us from some other time zone. I'm going to say a bit about the same topics as my colleagues, but I'm going to put them in the perspective of the American Statistical Association, because it occurred to me as I thought about this that those of you who are familiar with professional associations like the ASA or the AMS may think that what we do is publish journals and hold meetings. And yeah, we publish journals and hold meetings, but there's a great many other things that we do that are relevant to society and in particular to matters of social justice. You'll see in this very old seal of the American Statistical Association that we were founded in 1839, which makes us the second oldest professional society in the United States. The only one that's older was actually founded by Ben Franklin. So that goes back even further, the American Philosophical Society. And I like to say that we're the oldest one that you can join. You have to be invited to join the American Philosophical Society. But that 1839 number that you see there is not an accident. The ASA was founded that year out of concern about the quality of the data that was going to occur in the 1840 census of the United States population. And it turns out that those concerns about the quality of that data were very, very real. Data from the 1840 census was badly flawed, and among the other consequences of the use of that data was that there were numbers in there that people were using to say that slavery was a positive thing for the enslaved. And this is really relevant to the way things have played out for the 2020 census as well, because bad things come from bad numbers. And it's really hard to be able to correct those numbers once they've been given the seal of approval of the US government through the census. But the numbers in the 1840 census were really bad. And because of that, advocates of slavery for quite a while used those numbers to misportray the status of the enslaved. And one of those people who saw that data and at first did so was a man by the name of Edward Jarvis. But he figured out that he was wrong for all kinds of reasons, but not the least of which is that the numbers that were in the census couldn't possibly have been right, not just because of the ridiculous thing that they said, but for other mathematical reasons. They just had to be wrong. And so with the sort of the brand new American Statistical Association, he worked very hard to do that. Ultimately was not successful in correcting those numbers, but it's through his work that we know how bad those numbers were. And by the way, I might just say how unusual it is in the present time for people to acknowledge that they are wrong and try to do something about it. What's at stake if we get the numbers wrong? Well, Karen mentioned those things already. We won't, the money won't go where the people are, and that's what the money is for. Karen mentioned $675 billion going to federal, state, and local governments. A study shows that about $1.5 trillion in annual funding is guided in some way by the census. So beyond the government entities that Karen mentioned, even to things like, as is from the census counts page that you see here, even things like where bus routes go. And these things make a lot of difference, as Karen said, because they affect that redistricting. Where those districts are organized is based on census data. So the ASA has been active in trying to do research, to promote good results in the census. We have a task force that works with the Census Bureau to evaluate the quality of the 2020 census, because again, the data needs to be good data. We're a partner with Karen's organization, AMS, on dealing with partisan gerrymandering issues as well. And another ASA project that relates to the votes is we were the first organization to promote something called risk limiting audits, which was developed by one of our members. It's a way of checking the accuracy of the vote without having to resort to counting all the votes over again. As you well know, in Georgia, the votes got counted a really lot of times. Now, I'm going to finish up by digressing off of voting issues to something else that's important, that relates to data science, that ASA is involved in, and that I wanted to be sure to mention since I have this unique opportunity and wonderful opportunity to speak to you. That is, anyone who thinks about data science needs to be thinking about the moral and ethical implications of the work that's being done, because big data can lead to some big wrongs. Probably many of you read about the article referred to in the lower right-hand corner on this screen. Facial recognition, biased facial recognition because of the way the data is tested has been an enormous problem. Mortgage loans and the continuing of redlining is a huge issue. So the ASA has a subcommittee of a broader anti-racism task force that's working on dealing with these kinds of issues and helping people to understand the importance of anti-racist approaches to data science and statistics. And so with that, I'll wrap up, and I look forward to discussing these matters with you.
Thank you so much, Ron. So now I'm just going to ask all the panelists to go ahead and resurface. At this point, actually, I'm going to pass the ball over to Bettina, who will give us the responses for the surveys. Give us a promo. And if you haven't already, thinking of questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will get to them shortly. Bettina?
Hello, good morning. So thank you all for attending and taking our poll. I'll end the poll right now and share the results. So we like to do some polling to make it a little bit interactive and to know a little bit more about our audience each time. So this time around, we actually have 78% of our attendees are not currently enrolled students. So a lot of outside folks who are not students. Additionally, for those who are students, we have a good spread across freshmen, sophomore, junior, senior, and our graduate levels. But again, the majority of the audience are not students. We have a large female presence on the webinar today. And we have a lot of folks from outside of Georgia. So welcome, we're really glad to have reached outside of the Atlanta, Georgia area. And we hope you'll tune in for the remainder of our sessions this semester. 97% of everyone here participated in the census. Wonderful, thank you. It's great that folks understand how important that is to the discussion we're having on redistricting and voting. We have 95% of folks who are registered to vote. And I do take into account, I did not put if eligible because maybe not everyone is eligible to vote. So a good 95% for the audience here. And then how did you hear about the data science seminar series? A lot of different responses. We do have a newsletter that you can join that we send out monthly. We send out email blasts to our colleagues as well as the panelists do. We have a presence on social media, on Facebook, on YouTube, and then a lot of our AUC faculty definitely promote to their students in classes. And then we're really interested in figuring out that other. So if you want to drop in the chat how you heard about it, that would be very helpful to us. And then also we like to understand how many folks are from within our AUC community. So the Atlanta University Center institutions are Clark Atlanta University, Research One University, Co-ed University, Morehouse College, a male liberal arts college, Morehouse School of Medicine, which is a medical school with a very heavy social mission, and then Spelman College, a female-only liberal arts college, and the AUC Woodruff Library, which serves all of the institutions. So out of our audience here, it's almost an even split in terms of folks who are AUC community members and folks from outside. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for participating. And now we'll jump into the Q&A. You can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit a question, and the panelists will be able to answer from there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Bettina. Really interesting. So I'm going to just dive into the questions that have come over the Q&A. So this actually comes from Professor Morehouse. Just this week, the Georgia Senate passed a bill requiring the ID for absentee voting, and House Bill 531 seeks to eliminate Sunday voting as well as limit ballot drop boxes. How can data be used to support these measures and or illuminate the issues with these type measures that many believe are being proposed to suppress and undermine voting? Robert?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And the issue that we have with both of those bills and many of the other efforts that are taking place is they're not data driven. When you ask and I spoke to some of our Republican senators who support these acts, they don't give you data. There's absolutely no proof that vote by mail was subject to voter fraud. As all of you know, the Georgia vote was counted 3 times in the last election, and it was confirmed each time. So what these efforts are exactly what we spoke about earlier, this effort to skim votes off. If I can get 1 out of every 100 people who doesn't have a photo ID to not be able to vote, well, then I've changed 1% of the election. If I can get 1 person who would be voting on Sunday who won't be able to vote at all because they have child care needs or they have school or they're a transient population, well, then I've effectively gotten rid of 2% of the vote, and that's enough to swing an election in a state as close as Georgia. So what we have to do is, 1, present the evidence, the data-driven evidence of exactly what populations will be affected by this. What we're seeing from many is that, well, 95% of people are fine. Okay, what about the other 5%? If this will only 99.9% of people will be able to do this. What about the 0.1%? Because as we said, what they are attempting to do is just bald-faced maintain a majority for one party based on limiting the votes of poor people, of African Americans, of other minority groups. And as long as they're allowed to do so, they'll continue to have hegemonic control of the state.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to the next question. I think, Karen, this will be, I'm going to toss this to you, but let me read the question first. Somebody said that I would love to hear about the relationship between racial gerrymandering and partisan gerrymandering. In what ways do attempts to address these 2 issues align? And how would attempts to address these issues not align?
Yeah, that is a great question, and obviously recognizes the fact that not all Blacks, for example, vote one way. Not all Hispanics vote one way. Not all women vote one way. And I realize that's gender gerrymandering, but that's a different topic. And this is changing and developing. And I think I'm really interested to see this coming fall and in this round coming up, how this will be looked at. And I think that last time, so the ability of computers to help with redistricting has really changed over the past few decades, as you can imagine. I mean, last time it was pretty good. The time before that in 2000, not as good. The time before that in 1990, not as good. And I'm not sure before that how, what the usages were. But last time when I was involved with this, you can make up your map, and then you can say, now show me where Blacks live. And you can see really quite clearly the distribution. You can just lay it on there. They're map layers in all the software tools that are used. And I think these are becoming more sophisticated. And I think that this time, because of the court cases that took place over the past decade, we're going to have more more groups that are doing the lines, trying to protect themselves from lawsuits, which you might say, oh, that's sort of too bad that that's how they think. On the other hand, it's probably better than not. So I think we're going to have groups who are drawing the lines, kind of looking to make sure they're not going to be charged with racial gerrymandering or partisan, and how those. So they're going to look at how those two overlap, the distribution of partisans and racial, and try to look at sort of the intersections of not treat Blacks as one group, but try to understand, which Blacks are voting Democrat, who are voting Republican, and so on.
Thank you. Thanks, Karen. So Ron, in your remarks, you talked about this thing of bad numbers. I'm a mathematician, I love all numbers. So what makes numbers bad numbers? I mean, is this bad in the Michael Jackson sense, or is this bad in another way?
So I saw Sarah's question in the chat box in the Q&A, and I was really glad to see it because it gives me an opportunity to clarify any misunderstanding about that. I chose bad deliberately as opposed to some other adjective that I might have used. I could have used flawed, for example. Flawed data is flawed data. It means it's got some limitations or shortcomings, and there are almost always some kinds of restrictions or limitations or shortcomings on data. Human beings have flaws. That doesn't make them bad. And one thing I want to be real sure to point out, because this may have been underlying Sarah's question, is that just because I don't like the implications of data doesn't make the data bad. What I was referring to when I said bad data is data that is the result of a bad process, a seriously flawed process. And in the case of the 1840 census, there were just errors that were not correctable and resulted in ridiculous things, like in the case of the issues, the racist conclusions that were being made from the data. There were more Black people counted as insane in certain districts than there were Black people in that district. So you got to figure, there's really serious issue going on there. And if we fast forward that to 2020, if we don't get it right, if we undercount communities of color, then we have bad data. It's the result of a process that can lead us to conclusions that don't accurately reflect what's going on with the data. Now, I'm not getting on here to say that that's what the experience is going to be in 2020, but we do have organizations, including the ASA, that are taking a pretty close look at how this data is, what the quality of it looks like as it comes out.
Thank you. So Robert, we have a question asking about voters by Black and brown folks looking at the Biden versus Trump campaign. So what happened in this past election? I mean, Georgia, I live right off of Peachtree Street, and we actually ended up having a parade when the state went blue. So what happened with Black voters in this most recent campaign, and how can data help us unpack and understand the dynamics of the voting?
Well, this is actually one of the more interesting campaign cycles for Black voters, because historically Black voters have been rather monolithic. That you could, if you were the Democrat, if you rolled out of bed, you could expect to get between 88% of the Black vote and 92%. And if you're President Obama, you're up around 95, 98% for obvious reasons. However, President Trump did former President Trump did something very interesting for Republicans, which was invest heavily in the Black vote. You had Black voices for Trump. You had Vernon Jones running around, Diamond and Silk, Candace Owens, those sorts of people who, in many circles, they're considered to be kind of jokes and not serious. But for people who were teetering voters or who were uninterested, they actually were able to tick President Trump's support among Black voters up significantly in many districts. And if you look at David Perdue's numbers, I think versus the first time he ran versus this election, he was up over 5 points based on these efforts. So I do think what we're seeing going forward is a diversification of the Black vote. You're having more Black people who are self-identifying as Democratic Socialists. You have more Black people who are self-identifying as conservatives or MAGA voters, so on and so forth. And then also many who are Republicans, but the vast majority is still Democratic. But I do think that for Democratic candidates going forward, you're going to have to redouble your efforts, because it's not enough anymore to simply roll out of bed, say, hey, I'm the Democrat running, the Republicans are racist. You're going to have to actually put policy proposals in place. What a lot of people keep saying, these tangible legislative victories in order to get that number that you're used to getting. I think that's just a benefit to the Black community. Anytime you got two people fighting over you, you're going to get a better outcome than when one party thinks they can take you for advantage and the other party thinks they don't need you at all.
Thank you. Karen, in your previous institution, you actually team taught courses with political science. And here at the AUC, we are developing data science as a whole disciplinary effort, a whole institutional, consortium-wide effort. So I really love that you team taught this course with a political scientist. So we have a librarian here, Woodruff Library here in the Atlanta University Center. And the librarian says that they refer students and faculty to freely available US government documents and websites related to the census and statistics all the time. But if you were to advise a faculty member, where would you look for data if you were trying to put together a course or a module trying to intersect the two, political science with data, maybe with votes, racial gendering, a lot of these important topics that have impact on Black America? Where could they look?
Yeah, thanks. So the Census Bureau itself publishes huge numbers of data sets. And I looked it up recently. The number of requests they get per year for data sets is enormous. And I don't know if this is rude, but I'm wondering if I can pass this on to Ron, who I think might have better idea about this good question. And Ron, hopefully you're not going to be mad at me for doing that, but I think you probably have better information about that. That would be up to date.
So I'm going to confess that I had jumped ahead to get some stuff ready for a gerrymandering question that was asked in the chat box. So tell me what I'm supposed to make up an answer on for this, Karen, and I will.
So the question is, let's say there's a faculty member, and we want to advise the faculty member to look for documents, to look for data sets, it may be related to the census statistics. What sort of data resources do you prefer? So this could be the contextual information of the subject itself, but also the data.
Right. So one place that I'll mention that I'm sure Karen would also suggest too is that the government itself provides enormous resources, has invested heavily over the last decade or so, with some slowdown the last 4 years that I don't suppose I need to dwell on. But Census.gov and virtually every federal agency has data they want you to use, they want to share. They say consistently, we produce this data so people would use it. And so that's where I would go. And I would also offer that the questioner to reach out to me if there are specific questions about, oh, thanks, Bettina, perfect, in the chat box. That we would be, I would see what I could do, or at least refer the individual to maybe some people I know if they're looking for specific kinds of data.
Well, Ron, we may take you up on that. So if you have, we could talk later and perhaps we can gather some resources that we could share with the community on what data we could be looking at and how to process. And we'd be happy to share those resources.
Thanks.
But let me come back to you, Ron. Let me go back to Robert. So we have a communication scholar who's very interested in exploring how to close the gap between what political data reveals versus what the public consumes. So we see this people employing machine learning, data science to manipulate voters, to deter them from voters. We saw that in the 2016 Trump campaign in multiple cities across the nation that targeted Black voters. And so Valerie says this is an uphill battle, and I totally agree. So what are the strategies that we can use to address this, and how can we ensure that this doesn't happen again so that every vote will count?
Well, the focus has to be on getting the proper data. This is why this conversation is so important, because one thing Reverend Jackson always wants us to do is give him a postcard with the stats on it. He'll make the words up, he'll make it sound pretty and everything, but give him the stats so that he can give a speech, so that so that we all have the same sheet of paper to be going off of. So one is providing the proper data in order to be able to disseminate it. Step two is the dissemination apparatus. What we saw in 2016 was Russian troll farms and Chinese operatives and the Iranians were able to post fake news stories to suppress votes. You know, we had Senate hearings and impeachment trial, all those things about that. We understand that. The problem is the response in 2020 may have been worse than the sickness in the first place, because what we saw was draconian social media censorship from Twitter, from Facebook. You know, you couldn't post anything without it getting tagged, without being taken down, being shadow banned, having your account canceled, those sorts of things, which made it difficult to get accurate information out because they were over censoring to prevent the incorrect information from getting out. So I think the first step is getting the proper data, and then the second step is finding out the proper way to disseminate it to the population where they are at. As much as people made fun of it, there was a viral ad for the 2020 election, "Get your booty to the polls," with dancers who were encouraging people to come to come out and vote. It was silly. It got ridiculed online. It was called everything on earth. But guess what? It got people there. So once you have the data, disseminating it to people in a way that they can consume is how you fight back against those Russian troll farms and the attempts to limit the spread of proper information and to disseminate misinformation.
That's awesome. Thank you. And yeah, I saw that video. It's engaging. Ron, you're not off the hook yet. So I just want to use this as a last question, if that's all right. So there are calls. So once we have the data, we can disseminate the data. We need to be prudent and calm and use ethics and sound reasoning. So there are calls for a purely algorithmic approach to redistricting. How does that differ from the way redistricting is done today? And are there any biases that has a purely data-driven approach to redistricting introduces? And how do we ensure, how do we check, how do we test these algorithms or software to make sure we're not having biases creep in? Because often these biases are in a blind spot and they can impact how we process, analyze data, and then it can impact how we inform politics, which could lead to disastrous effects. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, so I'm going to answer real quickly because I know we're out of time. I can give you the link, or you can just search for ASA AMS statement on gerrymandering. And in that statement, you'll have some links to, or some citations for research that address, first of all, how much easier it has become for districts to gerrymander because of all this computing power. And then that it's also become easier to use methods that have been developed to identify when this has happened. So it is actually possible to evaluate these algorithms. And Karen is the expert on this as well, so she may want to have a final word on this question.
Go for it, Karen.
Sure, yeah, and to the person who asked this question, Ron and I both put our emails in the answer that I think you could reach out to us if you want after. But there are, of course, algorithms that can do this. They're geographically oriented typically. I'll be very quick. There's a lot of things to balance. There's a lot of criterion you have to satisfy. People are very invested in their district, knowing what their district is, where their district is. It's really a human process. And even though I'm a mathematician, I would speak against having an algorithm do this. It's a really human process. So I'll end with that.
Thank you. And thank you, Robert, Karen, and Ron, for this interesting discussion on data in the Black vote. We have a lot of work to do to make sure that people aren't turned away, deterred from voting, but also that we employ best practices on how we use data science, how we use machine learning, so that really every vote counts and that we're ethical. So thanks again for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. And thank you all the attendees for joining us today. Reach out, and I'm gonna put a call to Ron, Karen, and Robert. If there's something that you would like for us to share with the attendees, any documents or what have you, we'd be happy to do that. Thanks again, and we'll be back here at the second week of March with Dr. Dennis Dean, who's going to talk about data and the life sciences. So that will be soon coming. Thanks, and have a great day, everyone.